Hey, everybody. Welcome again to the Crimson Chronicles podcast. I'm Rick Morton, your host, and we have a really special episode in store for you today. We've been trekking through Crimson Tide history and coaching changes. If you've been hanging with us over the course of the last several weeks, we're drawing to a close in that conversation as we get a little closer to current times. Our guide through all of this, as he is for all the episodes, is my broadcast partner, Tommy Ford, who is a Bama historian, insider into the program, spent 37 years at the University of Alabama and most of that in the athletic department. Tommy, help us get into today and introduce us to our guests for today.
I appreciate it, Rick. As we have covered, as you said, all the transitions between head coaching staffs all the way back to Ears Whitworth to Bryant. And today we got a great friend of mine and a fellow worker for a long time in the athletic department, Steve Townsend, who's going to talk about the Mike Shula to Nick Saban transition. And Steve has been a friend a long time, came to the athletics department in 1988 as assistant AD for sports information. He had been at the SEC office for about 6 years as associate commissioner. He was promoted to associate AD in 1991 and was a fixture for many years in our athletic department. And he was a close friend and confidant of Mal Moore, who had become our athletic director in 1999. Steve is a writer by trade and also has written at least 4 books: Season of Champions, a book on the 92 national championship team, Talk of the Tide, along with John Forney, that came out in 1993. Then in around 2003, he wrote a book called Tales of 1978-79, A Time of Champions, which were stories from our 78 and 79 national championship teams. And finally, Crimson Heart in 2014, which is Mal Moore's autobiography and the contents of which we will discuss in detail today. Steve, thank you for being on with us.
I appreciate you having me, Tommy and Rick. Look forward to it.
Let's get started. In a nutshell, before we get into the hiring of Coach Saban, we left with Randy Ross in our last episode, the dismissal of Mike Shula. In a nutshell, tell us about Mal's decision to dismiss Mike following the end of the 2006 season, and could he have stayed if he had made some staff changes?
First of all, after we lost to Tennessee in Knoxville, I think we were 5-3 after that game and had Duke, LSU, Mississippi State, and Auburn remain. And after that game, some friends of mine had sat in Jimmy Sexton's box. They were Alabama fans, but Jimmy went to Tennessee and was a manager at Tennessee. And Jimmy had told them, if Alabama makes a change, I think Coach Saban may be interested in that job. It's one of a very few he may be interested in. And the guys who called me asked me if I'd get the word to Mal. So I went to Mal's office on that Monday after the game and told him, so this is a situation if something happens. And Mal said, I think we'd have to have a losing record or 500 record in order for there to be a change. So with Mississippi State wasn't very good, to say the least, and Duke wasn't very good, and we barely beat Duke. We went to LSU, and I don't think there was much hope of winning there. And then, well, no, it wasn't. That was Coach Miles was coaching then, excuse me. And then we lost to Mississippi State. I don't think anybody saw that coming. So the pressure really became intensified after that particular game against State to make a move. And then we had Auburn at home. And I thought we were just as good as Auburn and probably should have won the game, but we didn't. At that point, the decision was made that a change had to be made. And the following week is when Mike was relieved of his job and opened it up, which leads into the Coach Saban saga.
And Steve, I know we're going to try to spend more time talking about the Coach Saban portion of this and all. And by the way, for an outsider that didn't have a whole lot to do with this transition, this sort of seems like a little bit of a spy novel. As we read through some of the twists and turns and the things that said along the way, Steve, I have a question for you about just backing up a little bit and thinking about as things were moving toward into that season, the Mississippi State game really seemed like from a fan's perspective to be kind of the pivotal moment. And I know as a fan who was way on the outside of this and just watching the conversation when and it was around because it was Coach Croom and the fact that he'd been in the conversation for the position along the way and was an Alabama alum to lose to that team and to lose to that team with what the perceived quality was of that team. That was really when it felt like the temperature dialed up on from the outside. Did y'all feel that from the inside?
No, I think that's 100% accurate. There were a lot of fans, to be blunt, who weren't happy after the Duke game, even though we had in Knoxville. I thought we should have won that game, to be frank, which we had lost that. And then the Duke game was a total debacle. And we lost to LSU. And then the Mississippi State game, there's no question, with Sylvester coaching there and all, he'd been the finalist with Mike for the Alabama job. And candidly, Mal wanted to hire Sylvester to replace Mike Price. But anyway, that didn't work out. Mike Shula got the job, but the pressure after the Mississippi State game was intense, where there was no question in my mind that we had to beat Auburn in order for him to keep the game. Now, with that being said, both Mal and Dr. Witt really liked Mike a lot personally. And one day after leading up to the Auburn game, Mal said, this is really a difficult situation because I think so much of Mike personally. And I said, I'm going to ask you one simple question, and you don't have to answer it, but you need to answer to yourself. I said, the question I have, and a lot of fans have, is can Mike Shula win championships at Alabama? I said, you've been around a lot of championships as a player and a coach, and you know what it takes to win championships, and can he do it? And I said, you don't have to answer, and he didn't. But I think deep down inside, we all know what he felt. After the Auburn game, obviously that's when the decision was finally rendered to make a change in the head coaching position.
And just for the record, Mike's 4-year record at Alabama was 26 wins, 24 losses, 13 and 19 in the SEC. His 4-year record versus LSU and Auburn was 0 and 8, and he was 1 and 3 against Tennessee. So obviously Mal felt like this was not up to the Alabama standards and felt like a change had to be made.
That's correct.
So, Steve, following the dismissal of Mike in the late night hours of Saturday, November 25th, which was about a week after the Auburn game, mounted a small team of close associates to assist him in hiring the next coach. And these names are confidential, although you were very close to this team. And so just tell us about the whole process of hiring Nick Saban.
There were several factors. Number one, he wanted a coach that he felt could win championships, a coach that would have a strong enough backbone to resist all the pressures that come with the job. And the ones who have had greatness in Alabama, all you two guys know, dating back to Wallace Wade, the real successful one, they've been awfully tough guys. He'd been their own men, so to speak. And he felt that we needed someone like that. He also made sure that we thoroughly vetted any candidate where we didn't have a situation arise like it did with some of the previous coaches. So that was important too. But he really was locked in from the get-go on Coach Saban. And I certainly was too, because of his track record. He'd won a national championship, but like Mal said, and obviously he knew a heck of a lot more about football than I did, is for the first time he had seen a coach in the SEC since he'd been there, since Coach Bryant, who had a complete outlook toward the game, meaning everything from the kicking game to the offense to the defense to the whole ball of wax. And he wanted a guy who he thought could bring all those elements back into the pro, where the toughness returned and the ability to win a national championship returned. So he was his primary focus from the start, although it certainly took a lot of twists before late fruition.
Well, as Rick mentioned, y'all's work came straight out of a spy novel. Reading Mal's book, which you assisted Mal with, there were many clandestine meetings and secret phone calls and trips and all sorts of things. But take us through the timeline starting with the hiring of Chuck Ninus, which may or may not have been a distraction, but I do want you to elaborate on that a little bit.
Chuck had been a friend of mine for a long number of years. He had been commissioner of the Big Eight during its heyday of the Oklahoma and Nebraska dynasties. And then he took over as the head of the College Football Association, which was really the strength of the SEC, Old Southwest Conference, ACC, Big 12, and the major independents, which were at the time were Florida State and Penn State and South Carolina and others. So Chuck had built up a national following as a leader. And then when the CFA folded, he went into consulting business and was helping in hiring coaches. We felt like we needed to use someone who could answer to the press while we worked behind the scenes without even Chuck knowing about it. So Chuck became a spokesperson who people were talking to about who's involved, who wants the job, et cetera. And he was really a ruse, to be frank with you. A red herring in the whole incident was Chuck. And I don't know whether he ever knew that or not, but that's what we were doing.
This is fascinating. This story, the CIA should have consulted with you guys, honestly, in some of the intrigue in this and the way that the situation was played out in the background while creating a public idea and a public persona is just masterful.
Tommy had mentioned this in some of our briefings on this, but one thing that we were sworn to secrecy, I didn't go into my office for over a month. I stayed at home, and back then, I don't think we had texting, and I know I didn't have texting, but I communicated with email other than with Mal, his assistant, Judy Tanner. I didn't talk to anybody because I wasn't going to tell anybody anything. And I was getting all these emails. I must have got 1,000 one day telling me that Steve Spurrier had gotten the job. And that just, well, that's how Mal did talk to Steve. There's no question about that. At one of the basketball games, rumor mill broke. He had taken the job, and some people had Steve's phone number and were giving it out to everybody to call Steve to encourage him to take the job. And I don't think that made him very mad, but I was in Mal's office when he talked to Steve on the phone originally. And from the get-go, Steve had told him, I've just completed my first year at South Carolina. If it had been last year, I'd have been interested in talking to you, but I've got a job and I'm not a candidate. So Steve was really never a player in it, despite the rumor mill.
Yeah.
And they had talked to him in New York again for the final time, just asked me if he had any interest, which we did.
And we're going to talk about that New York trip because that was a very important time for this whole process. But let's talk about Chuck Moore, Coach Mal's nephew, and his relationship with Coach Saban. Tell us about that.
Chuck Moore is Mal's nephew, he's a great guy, but Chuck was a home builder over on Lake Morton in Georgia, where Saban has his house, and he did a lot of work for Coach Saban, and they became friends. And Chuck had asked him one time, and Coach Saban didn't know Chuck was even related to Mal. And Chuck said, if the Alabama job came open, would you be interested in it? And Saban said, that's what he had told, Sexton had told us, that was one of the few jobs he would be interested in. And so Chuck obviously was a source of information to use during that time. And Chuck told Coach Saban, said, Mal is my uncle. And of course, Nick at the time had no idea they were kin, but Chuck was really helpful in giving Miles some guidance through the whole situation.
And Chuck became a pretty important figure, didn't he? As far as let's just say the flow of information of the way that
That's
things
correct.
went
Yes,
through that. Yeah. That's
he
amazing.
certainly did.
You mentioned the Hall of Fame trip to New York City, which Mal had been on every year for many years. And he talked about the discussions with Steve Spurrier while he was up there. I think he met with Jimmy Sexton. He actually interviewed Rich Rodriguez and Greg Schiano. Tell us about that trip from what you can remember.
He met with Steve and Steve's wife, Jerry, at the Waldorf. And once again, Coach Spurrier told him he wasn't interested in Mouse. So I just had to make sure that I'm covering all my bases and that you're not interested. Now, Jimmy Sexton was up there too, monitoring things, because obviously he represents a lot of coaches. And as you noted, Mal interviewed both Coach Rodriguez and Coach Schiano at the Waldorf. And he really liked both of them, but he really liked Coach Schiano. He thought he was really up and coming coach who was really going to make a big splash in the business. But it was John Gilbert was there, who was an associate AD of ours at the time. And John was leading Mal down the streets of New York and spotted a reporter following him around, from Birmingham, taking notes.
Yeah.
And,
the Auburn beat writer, no less.
The Auburn beat writer. And then that night, Mal was on the phone in his hotel suite. He heard somebody up against his door trying to listen in on his conversation. So, and I knew most of these guys back then, but I didn't know this till much later. I was told by another friend of mine at the Birmingham News, they had somebody following me around trying to get information. I was never leaving my house near that. So they are going to the house, so they weren't getting much out of me. But yeah, he met with them, and ultimately, I think through a lot of pressure, particularly from powers to be at the university, the decision was to offer the job to Coach Rodriguez, because it was pretty evident that Coach was not going to speak to anybody about the job until the conclusion of the Miami NFL season, which I think on December 31st. And
that's right.
Anyway, the decision was made to offer Coach Rodriguez the job, which he accepted. And they were coming back from New York, and the story broke on ESPN that Rodriguez would be named the coach. I got a call from one of our
Austin.
Yeah, I'm holding my breath.
Oh man, and it's getting good.
Right at the spot.
Yeah.
We were just about to get to the porch.
Again, I'm sorry.
No, you're good, Steve. If you could just back up and start right where you were there, I think I can figure out how to put it
Where
together.
you left it, Steve, was after Rodriguez had been hired or offered the job and accepted. Mal was on the way back from Tuscaloosa, and you got word of something.
Yeah, on that Thursday, Mal and university attorneys and one of the associate ADs were meeting with the reps of Coach Rodriguez working on the contract. And I got a call from the lawyer representing Mal, and who was involved in our side of the Nick Saban side of it, called me from New York and said, "You need to get to Mal's house immediately and tell him that Rich Rodriguez is pulling out of it, and it'll be announced tonight."
Yeah.
So I went straight to his house, banged on his door, and he wasn't going to answer because they were in there in a private session. So he came outside. And he said, "I don't want them to know that you're here. Nobody knows that you're here." And he told me, said, "We're in there finalizing the contract." And I said, "Well, I'm going to tell you, Coach Rodriguez is pulling out of it." He said, "Are you sure?" I said, "I'm positive, or I wouldn't be here." And I said, "I just let you that according to Jimmy, is that he still thinks that Coach Saban could be in play on it. And Mal said, went back. He said, if it breaks, he's out. Come here to my house tomorrow night, and y'all park. The attorney and I park a block away from his house where nobody would see our cars. It was freezing. It was cold December Friday night, and I'd gotten Bob Stoops' contract from Oklahoma. We knew how much he was making, which was, if I remember correctly, it was like $3.5 million.
Right.
And we also knew the year before Stoops had become the head coach at OU, their total revenues generated in the athletic department were $25 million. The second year they won a national championship and they brought in $100 million.
Wow.
So we knew the value of having a guy who could win a national championship would be substantial, and being able to pay him the highest salary. We went to met at Miles' house on that Friday night. We were going over contract, what Stoops was getting, and through Jimmy Sexton, we knew what Coach Saban would have to leave Miami, and he actually took a substantial pay decrease to come to Alabama. But during the middle of all this, we were meeting, and there was a knock on the door. And Miles said, I don't want anybody to know you're here. So he shuffled us into the laundry room. One guy did sneeze from all those vapors in there. One of us sat on the washing machine, the other one on the dryer, while Mal met with one of his associate ADs, a member of the board, going over the situation. We sat there for about
can't
an
make
hour.
this up.
We were whispering because we couldn't talk very loud where they could hear us, because it was near where they were meeting. Finally, they broke up and we got out of there. We met till about midnight, went through all those terms of what would have to have. Anyway, Mal met the next day with Dr. Witt, and I think, and I don't know this for a fact, but I think he met Paul Jr. the next day to get approval on the money. And they both felt adamantly that we needed to get a guy who could win.
Yeah.
To reestablish the Alabama brand, the Alabama program. So they were on board with it. The problem was, this was like, I think, December 9 or December 10th. So we had 3 weeks to go before Miami ended the season.
Yeah.
And Coach Saban absolutely refused to talk to anybody affiliated with the university. Jimmy, in fact, made a decision to come to Tuscaloosa. I think it was on Miles' birthday, which was December 19th. And Jimmy came in early and went through all the facilities, because Coach told him he was really concerned about the facilities at Alabama, because the last time he had been there while he was coached at LSU, he thought they were substandard and would deter in recruiting. But Jimmy went through everything, and he had assured Coach Saban that they had upgraded everything since he had last been in Tuscaloosa. And then after he made his little unbeknownst tour of everything, Mal and he met to discuss everything to ensure that the monies, everything else was all right. And Mal said, I guess this means we got Coach Saban. And Jimmy said, no, I didn't say that. He said, Coach Saban might take it. He may not take it. I'm just letting you know that there is nothing definite about this. I just want to make sure he's got all the information, so if the time comes, he'll have the information to make a decision.
Yeah, and
This had to have been. Oh, I'm sorry, Tommy. I just want to interject here, and Steve, get your reaction for a second. This had to have been agonizing in the aftermath of our most recent change, which we'll talk about on our next episode. But 72 hours felt like months. So the fact that we're talking about of more than a month period that you guys are in the midst of, how did the pressure feel to y'all at that point, in just the amount of scrutiny and the amount of pressure that was coming from the outside about all that you were, all that you had in your hands and the stakes of the decisions that were being made?
It was pretty significant. Obviously, a lot more on Mal than anybody else. But there was nobody who loved or cared about the program more than Mal. And people say he was worried about his legacy. He knew Mal, he wasn't worried about his legacy. What he was worried about was saving that program. He didn't care who got the credit. He just wanted somebody to come in there and re-energize Alabama and put us back in our rightful place. That was his main motivation. But that time period doesn't seem long when you say 3 or 4 weeks, but man, when you're in that situation, get all this pressure, well, everyone from the board members all the way down to the janitors in the building to make this decision to get a coach. You know, everybody, if you don't get the right coach, it doesn't make any difference what the recruiting situation is. So he had embedded himself into talking to a few other coaches, but his main focus still was on trying to get Nick Saban to come to Alabama.
And Steve, you were talking about Jimmy Sexton's visit to Tuscaloosa and seeing the facilities, but he didn't exactly just drive up into Mal's neighborhood and park with the Tennessee license plate, did he?
No, he parked out in, if I remember, somewhere out in Northport, was transported to Mal's house where nobody knew he came to Tuscaloosa, but a handful of people, to be blunt. And Jimmy never told anybody that either.
During this time, the team was getting ready for the Independence Bowl against Home State, and Joe Kynes had been named interim head coach. And so on the way to Shreveport, Mal actually takes a little detour and goes to Houston and interviews Mike Sherman, who was the former Green Bay Packers head coach and the associate head coach at the Texans at that time. Was that something that was serious, or did he just want to gauge his interest in the job in case Coach Saban's deal fell through?
I think he was obviously looking for backup plans if it fell through with Coach Saban. I know that he'd also spoken at length with David Cutcliffe as well during that time period. The plan was to try to get Nick Saban, but if it fell apart, then you're looking at those two guys or somebody else to lean on. But yeah, he flew to Houston and met with Coach Sherman. Then he came back into Shreveport from there for the bowl game.
And then after the loss to Oklahoma State, I believe you and Coach Moore had a long drive back to Tuscaloosa, furthering your plans to zero in on Nick Saban. And come December 31, 3 days after the Independence Bowl, Miami did play their last game, December 31st. And Mal started to plan his trip to Miami. Tell us about the famous trip to Miami and to wait on Nick Saban.
Going back just a little bit, one night, Mal hardly left his suite in Shreveport. He stayed pretty much within the confines of his suite. But one night, I think it was the night before the game, he called Lance Thompson, who had been on Mike Dubos's staff and then had gone to LSU and was on Coach Saban's staff at LSU. Lance was coaching somewhere in Florida at the time. I think it was Florida Atlantic or Florida International. And Mal had asked him if he could go to one of the Dolphins practices, which Lance did. And Lance, on the phone, Mal called and said, "Did you get any feel?" And he said, "You got to know Coach Saban, you don't get much of a feel." I said, "I was out at practice." Coach said, "What the heck are you doing here?" He said, "I'm just trying to find out if you're going to take the Alabama job." See, Coach Saban shoot him out, and that was the end of it. Mal asked Lance, "You think we got a chance?" And he said, "I don't know, Coach." He said, "I hope you do, because he'll straighten that mess out up there." So the following day, it was January the 1st. And Tommy, you'd probably remember this. I think we were playing Oklahoma in basketball that day or somebody.
That's right.
It was cold and it was raining, it was sleeting and it was icy everywhere. And we had lined up an airplane that no one knew about. And it was from Faird Rafie in Huntsville, where they wouldn't track the numbers of the university plane or Paul Jr.'s plane or anybody else's that they usually use. So they used Faird's airplane to take Mal down there. So obviously, we had driven back from Shreveport. We went over everything, trying to persuade Saban. And he couldn't decide. He wanted me to go. Then I said, I think it'd be better if I stayed here and monitor things from our end of it in Alabama. So that's what we ended up doing. So he flew down there on the 1st, and he was hoping to get to see Coach Saban on the 2nd. Well, that didn't turn out to be the case because Coach Saban was meeting with his players and going over his final review of the 2006 season. Mal didn't meet with him. And he told me on that Monday night, I don't know whether I'll ever get in there to see him or not. So I can't get him in there. And Jimmy Sexton, to his credit, he called Terry Saban and said, I want you to let Mal in there to see you and talk to you, which he did on the following day. I think it was the Tuesday.
Correct.
Mal got in there. He'd already checked out of his hotel in Miami. That's how he felt things were not going well. So he met with Terry, and Mal approached it like he did when he was recruiting players. So he met with Terry, and they hit it off magnificently.
Yeah.
And she said, I want you to come back in for dinner and meet with Nick then. Mal had gone back to the hotel and rechecked back in. Coach Saban called Terry and said, I'm not going to meet with him. Just tell him I'm going to stay here in Miami. And Terry said, I hate to tell you this. He's coming to dinner tonight. You don't talk to him.
Guess who's coming to dinner?
Guess who's coming to dinner? Mal and Nick hit it off really well there, but it still wasn't any final decision made. I think he was torn between his obligations with Miami and really wanting to get back into the college game where he felt comfortable. And I'm certainly not speaking for him or Terry, but I think she wanted to get back into a college environment as well, probably as much or more so than he did. So she was a major factor, in my opinion, the final decision to get Nick back where he felt he belonged, which was college football. But that night, no decision was made. We'd gotten Ozzie Newsome to call Coach Saban. Ozzie and Coach Saban had a relationship dating back to their days with the Cleveland Browns when Ozzie was obviously a great player there, a Hall of Fame player, and Coach Saban was the defensive coordinator. They developed a friendship. Ozzie had obviously gone on to become one of the best and most respected GMs in the NFL. And Ozzie called Coach Saban and told him, the Alabama job is a great job. You don't have a quarterback at Miami, and you don't win in the NFL unless you got a quarterback. You don't have a roster built to win up there. And I think that played a factor too in helping us. And there was another person we got to call, so he asked me not to use his name, but he was pretty persuasive because he had an extensive background as a successful coach at Alabama. And he called Coach Saban and told him it's a great job. He said it's hard because they expect that.
Yeah.
And I think that helped in the final decision too. But I think he wanted to just come. And anyway, the next morning he met with the owners of the Dolphins, and they said, you really want to go to Alabama, don't you? He said, yeah. They said, well, we're not going to hold you here. And that's when he called back to the house and said, I'm ready. We're going, please. That's when Mal called me and he said, I'm going to call you from the airport. I'm not going to want anything out till we get him on the airplane. We got coach coming with us. So they loaded up in a little Mercedes, and I think it was 6 of them, but it's all the luggage and everything else. They loaded up, sitting on top of one another. Got to the airport.
And
the rest is history from there.
And the Mercedes driver, the limo driver, had no clue what was going on, did he?
No.
Frankie? I believe was in the...
Yeah, I don't think he hit a football from a turnip seed, but yeah, he knew something big was happening because all these video trucks and everything else followed up, following him around. I don't know what he thought who he was transporting, but he knew something big was happening.
Yeah, and is it truth or fiction that Mal told Bud Darby, who has been obviously named in the book as fair to pilot, that if I don't get Coach Saban, you might as well fly me to Cuba? Is that a truth or fiction?
Yeah. I don't know if he said Cuba, so I don't think I'll be able to go back to Tuscaloosa. But
Yeah.
yeah, that's pretty accurate. Yes.
Obviously, they got to the airport and you were in Tuscaloosa. From where were you monitoring the chaos at the airport, the chaotic scene when Coach
Well,
Saban's plane
he
landed?
called me and told me to get the word out that the uh, plane was arriving in whatever terminal that was, and make sure that Roddy Robertson was out there. Roddy was an associate AD and former player, and make sure Ronnie's there with the van to transport us all to campus. And John Gilbert was to be the point person on campus to show Coach Saban around. Because the thing Coach Saban wanted to do was go through the football facility, and they were staying at those suites in Bryant Hall. But Coach Saban wanted to go through the facilities before he did anything. And John was there to do that. Ronnie greeted him at the airport. And of course, the word had gotten out that he'd been hired and that the plane was arriving at whatever time that was. They had a massive turnout there in such a short period of time. Really amazing that many people got out there on such short notice, because it wasn't like a long time before we knew he was going to take the job, and all the fans gathered out at the Tuscaloosa airport.
Yeah.
That really says something about where the program was and the state of the fan base. Folks were excited. They were hungry. They were ready. And in the years since, have you ever heard Coach Saban refer to or talk about how important that crowd turned out and was like it was in setting the tone for everything that's happened since?
I haven't heard him say anything on that. I know that the A-Day crowd that year, when they basically filled up Bryant Denny for a spring football game, I think that's really was eye-opening to him and everyone else. And it really, I think, was the real impetus to getting that recruiting machine rolling, because we were fighting to get Julio Jones and some others. I think that was a very persuasive moment, was that, and really eye-opening to everybody. I think eye-opening to everybody nationwide that many people turned out for a spring football game. And one thing that he had told Mal, which has happened on the airplane coming back from Miami, is he said, "Coach Moore, you think you got a heck of a coach, don't you?" And Mal said, "Yeah, I wouldn't be in this plane with you if I didn't think you were a great coach." He said, "There are a lot of great coaches, a lot of good coaches. What I know how to do is get players." And Mal said, at that time was when I knew, I had no doubt we had the right man before, but that's essential, because we knew we had to get higher quality players to get back on the football map.
Yes. Funny,
Well,
Steve, you mentioned that A-Day game and where 92,000 people came. When that plane landed at Tuscaloosa Airport, Terry Saban said, quote, "Football has been my life and I love the game. There's no greater place in a school like Alabama that has tradition. And I can't wait to get in that stadium that has 92,000 screaming red fans. We're excited." And little did she know that 92,000 would be just about 3 months later at the A-Day game.
It's pretty amazing. I would have never believed it. I can assure you that a spring game could draw that much attention. I've never seen anything quite like it. It was truly a spectacle. And I think that, as Rick alluded to or stated, that was really the catalyst to show how hungry the fans were to once again have a program that they could be proud of and know that we were going to compete on not only a conference level, but a national level for championships. That was all built up until we won one in 2009, came close in 2008. But that certainly was the buildup.
I think, Tommy, I just want to point this out, though, just to say, Coach Moore's legacy is so important in the history of Alabama sports, and we all know that. But I think, honestly, I don't know that we give it enough importance. And I think the idea that he knew the intersection of a coach that had the drive and the passion to win and the focus with the fan base there was such an urgency and such a groundswell that was happening in the fan base to be able to capture that moment. And that A-Day game is the evidence and the beginning point. You're right. And Steve, I think you pointing that out as being a seminal moment is really true. But I think it can't be lost on us the foresight of Al Moore to really understand the intersection of those forces and to bring this together. And see, part of what you've told us up to this point, I think, just helps us to understand that this wasn't a series of accidental events. There was a lot of intentionality on the part of somebody that really had a great future view of what could be at the university. And it's just that's what's amazing about this story.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head and said sense of urgency, because I think that's how all of us around the program felt. It was an urgent moment. And I always harken back to that day I was sitting in Miles' office during that time period after uh, Coach Shula had been let go, and then the Rodriguez hiring had fallen apart, and seeing Mal look out his window on that practice field where he had spent so much time as a coach and as a player, looking out there and feeling the pressure of the whole world on him to restore the Alabama football program.
Steve, the next day on Thursday, January 4th at 10 a.m., the press conference was held introducing Nick Saban as Mal says, the University of Alabama head football coach. And I have never seen a smile wide as Mal Moore's was that day. It had to have been an unbelievable day for him.
Yeah, I think it was a culmination of a long, difficult journey to reach that point. And as much as he smiled introducing Coach Saban, I think the smile was even broader after Coach finished, because you're talking about hitting a home run. Coach Saban certainly did that day, and outlining what the program was going to become. And I'm pretty sure he envisioned it. I don't know how many other people envisioned it happened so quick, but that the air of confidence and game plan he had to turn the program around certainly was fulfilling, and it was energizing to everyone from the players to the fan base, because you could tell from that press conference, this guy is a winner. He's going to win big.
Yeah, his legacy will forever be entrenched not only in Alabama football history, but in college football history. Just going over real quickly what he accomplished: 7 national championships, 1 at LSU in 2003, 6 at Alabama, 09, 11, 12, 15, 17, and 20, 8 college football playoff appearances in 10 years, 11 SEC championships, 15 straight seasons with a number 1 AP ranking, a 292, 71, and 1 record, good for 6th all-time in FBS career wins, 201 and 29 at Alabama, 17 seasons. There's no losing seasons in 28 years as a college head coach, 4 Heisman Trophy winners. And here's one of the stats that really show Saban's effect on college football. Current college head coaches who worked under Saban include Kirby Smart at Georgia, Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss, Steve Sarkisian at Texas, Dan Lanning at Oregon, Mario Cristobal at Miami, Billy Napier at Florida, Mike Locksley at Maryland, Brett Key at Georgia Tech, Charles Huff at Marshall, Kurt Signetti at Indiana, Jim McElwain at Central Michigan, and Butch Jones at Arkansas State. And I'm sure I'm leaving out some. But I will wrap it up here. Coach Moore passed away March 30th, 2013. And at his memorial service, Coach Saban said, quote, Mal really convinced us with his simple honesty, his sincerity, and his obvious love for the school. This was a genuine person. At this point in my career, after spending 2 years in the NFL where things aren't always about the team, there's a lot of selfish play. It was very important for me to work for somebody that was the kind of man who was genuine and that you could trust. the honesty and integrity he had really made it difficult to say no, unquote.
I think that
Rick?
says it all.
Yeah.
Yeah, what an incredible legacy and what an important story. I think, Steve, we're just incredibly honored that you would come and unpack this story with us personally. I think it is, speaking as a lifelong fan of the Crimson Tide, this is a story that keeps us a little bit in wonder, to be honest with you, just all the twists and turns, but the magnitude of what this story means and Coach Moore's actions is not to be I think not to be underestimated. And so we just appreciate the fact that you having been an integral part of that and having a front row seat to it, we're willing to come in and talk about it. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate you contacting me.
And we try to end every episode the same way. So we just want to say roll tide.
Roll Tide.
Roll Tide. Thank you.